They said it was just a small hunt. I muttered under my breath, watching the dust rise from the ranch road. But it wasn't small. It was a violation, a trespass, an insult to decades of dedication. HOA Karen had waved them in with a smug smile, claiming authority she didn't possess, letting hunters roam freely across the land I had nurtured for years. The ranch wasn't just land, it was heritage. My bulls, rare and protected, had been bred for generations, a living legacy of strength, resilience, and lineage. Their very presence carried history, a bloodline carefully preserved against time, neglect, and misuse. And now, strangers with rifles and arrogance threatened what I had spent a lifetime protecting. I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I had prepared for this. Every fence, every gate, every overlooked corner had a purpose. The bulls, trained and aware, sensed danger in ways humans often overlooked. Their instinct, their power, their presence, they were my silent allies. The hunters, oblivious to the stakes, advanced with confidence, assuming the ranch was theirs to command. But they hadn't counted on knowledge, patience, or the calculated leverage of a man who had seen entitlement masquerade as authority one too many times. I stepped back, letting the dust and distant shouts fill the air. Each movement, each breath, each glance over the rolling land was a reminder. This wasn't just about property. It was about respect, boundaries, and the consequences of underestimating what one cannot control. The sun glinted off the horns of the nearest bull, catching light like a warning signal. And in that moment, I realized that the hunters had walked into a stage set long before they arrived. Every act, every threat, every arrogant assumption was about to meet its inevitable reckoning. Hit subscribe, watch till the end. The ranch stretched for miles, a tapestry of rolling fields, rugged terrain, and carefully maintained pastures. Each fence, each gate, each path had been laid with intent, a network designed to protect both land and livestock. My bulls, the pride of the ranch, grazed in their enclosures, massive and serene, their presence a testament to generations of careful breeding. They were not ordinary cattle. They were a protected heritage breed, rare and resilient, carrying bloodlines that had survived droughts, floods, and human negligence. For weeks, HOA Karen had been making incursions, sending letters, threatening fines, claiming authority over boundaries she had no right to enforce. But this latest act was worse. She had actively allowed hunters onto my property, brushing aside laws, warnings, and reason, as if her sense of entitlement could override ownership and heritage. The hunters, guided by her arrogance, moved with confidence across my pastures, unaware of the consequences they were stepping into. I walked along the edge of the land, observing quietly. Every hoofprint, every movement of the hunters, every subtle shift in the bull's posture was catalogued in my mind. I did not shout or confront. Patience had always been my greatest ally. Each day of preparation, each observation of the property and the patterns of intrusion, had led to this moment. The ranch, the bulls, the boundaries, they were all part of a carefully orchestrated plan. The bulls sensed the presence of strangers immediately. Their ears twitched, nostrils flared, eyes fixed. They were massive, commanding creatures, yet disciplined, aware of the subtle instructions that came from years of trust and handling. This was not chaos. It was strategy embedded in instinct, a silent warning to those who dared to disrespect what had been nurtured over decades. From the ridge, I watched the hunters moving toward the enclosures, their rifles slung casually, their steps confident. They did not understand the stakes. They assumed the property was open, that the bulls were mere livestock to be overlooked. They had underestimated knowledge, patience, and the quiet power of preparation. The sun glinted off the bulls' horns as they shifted, subtle movements that signaled readiness without alarm. Every detail mattered: the spacing of the hunters, the wind direction, the position of gates, and the natural lines of sight across the ranch. I did not intervene immediately. There was no need. The moment had been planned, the stage set. And so I stood, silent, steady, letting the air vibrate with anticipation. Every step the hunters took, every misjudged assumption, Every overconfident glance was drawing them closer to the realization that entitlement could not overpower heritage, instinct, and preparation. The ranch held its breath. The bulls waited, and I, standing at the edge of my land, felt the weight of history, patience, and inevitable consequence settle over the pasture. The lesson was about to unfold, precise and undeniable. The hunters moved slowly across the pasture, their boots crunching against dry soil, rifles slung casually over shoulders as if confidence alone could shield them from consequences. Each step they took carried arrogance, the kind that comes from being invited, whether knowingly or unknowingly, onto another person's property. HOA Karen had facilitated this, waving them past boundaries as if ownership were merely a suggestion and entitlement had the final word. From the ridge, I watched them, calm and measured, noting every movement. Their patterns were predictable. They spoke quietly to each other, oblivious to the signals being sent by the herd below. The bulls, massive and alert, had already picked up on the intrusion. Their ears twitched, nostrils flared, muscles coiled like springs ready to release. But they waited, disciplined and aware, guided by instincts honed over years and by the subtle influence of their keeper. I traced the natural lines of the land in my mind. The slope leading to the enclosures, the locations of hidden gates, the areas where brush concealed my presence. Everything mattered. The slightest misstep by the hunters could place them directly in a zone of unavoidable consequence. This was not about aggression. It was about leverage, timing, and respect. The wind shifted, carrying faint scents of sweat, leather, and arrogance toward the bulls. They sniffed, moving as one in coordinated, almost imperceptible gestures. The hunters, confident in their authority granted by HOA Karen, continued forward, unaware that every step was being calculated, every action anticipated. I adjusted my vantage, crouching slightly behind a cluster of trees, allowing the sun to catch my face just enough to illuminate my calm resolve. There would be no yelling, no dramatic confrontation. The lesson was about precision, patience, and inevitability. The bulls themselves became instruments of that lesson. Every flick of a tail, every low rumble, every careful repositioning was a warning, a prelude to the moment the hunters would understand the price of underestimation. Minutes passed. The hunters paused near the edge of the enclosure, murmuring to each other, their arrogance momentarily interrupted by curiosity and unease. The bulls remained steady, massive silhouettes against the pasture, radiating quiet authority. Their sheer presence communicated a message the hunters could not ignore. This land was protected, this life was sacred, and trespass came at a cost. I observed each hunter individually, cataloging their reactions, noting who might panic first, who might challenge the authority they had assumed. HOA Karen had enabled this intrusion, but she had failed to account for one critical factor: the intersection of preparation, instinct, and control. Authority and entitlement, untempered by comprehension, were fragile things. I moved quietly to the main gate of the enclosure, checking the locks and ensuring that the path the hunters expected to follow remained blocked. Subtle adjustments ensured that any attempt to circumvent the bull's space would only increase tension and elevate the lesson to its inevitable climax. Every fence post, every gate latch, every shadow was part of the choreography, invisible to them but critical to the outcome. The air vibrated with anticipation, a silent hum amplified by the distant lowing of the herd. The sun glinted off the bull's horns, sharp points that caught light like warning signals, and in that glint, the hunters saw a hint of the reckoning they could neither anticipate nor avoid. Their confidence began to waver, subtle cracks forming in the facade of entitlement. And I waited, calm, measured, patient. Every observation over weeks, every preparation for moments exactly like this, culminated in these next few minutes. The bulls, disciplined and aware, were ready. The hunters, arrogant and unaware, were walking into a lesson crafted with precision and inevitability. The stage was set, the actors unaware, the consequence ready to unfold. I stepped closer to the enclosure, calm and deliberate, letting the tension build like a taut wire. The bulls, massive and poised, shifted as one, their low rumbles vibrating through the earth, a warning to intruders who had assumed ignorance would protect them. HOA Karen's smug smile faltered as she finally noticed the controlled power of what she had allowed onto my land. The hunters froze, rifles lowering instinctively as the sheer presence of the herd became undeniable. Every horn, every muscle, every intelligent I projected authority and history. They had trespassed not just into property, but into generations of care, knowledge, and preservation. Panic and confusion replaced their earlier confidence. I adjusted the gate subtly, redirecting the hunters into paths carefully chosen to maximize both safety and the lesson they were about to learn. The bulls moved deliberately, not attacking, but asserting control over their space, forcing the intruders to confront boundaries they had ignored. Every step I took, every shift in the herd, communicated the consequences of arrogance, entitlement, and misjudgment. HOA Karen flinched, realization dawning that her authority meant nothing here. She had underestimated patience, preparation, and the subtle yet undeniable power of a force that had been nurtured, respected, and protected for generations. The dust settled slowly across the pasture, the hunters retreating with flushed faces and shaken confidence. Their rifles, once a symbol of assumed power, now hung uselessly at their sides, reminders of entitlement clashing with consequence. HOA Karen stood frozen near the edge of the enclosure, her posture rigid, her earlier arrogance dissolved into disbelief. She had walked onto my land believing her authority absolute, only to discover that preparation, patience, and respect for life outweighed entitlement at every turn. I stepped into the middle of the field, hands relaxed but alert, feeling the hum of the earth beneath the bull's hooves. Each massive creature moved with calm awareness, their eyes reflecting centuries of heritage, instincts sharpened, lineage preserved. They had not attacked, not once, yet every motion communicated dominance and control. Their presence was authority incarnate, a living testament to what could not be taken lightly. The hunters muttered, attempting excuses that fell flat against the silent weight of consequence. They had believed that entry implied control, that permission, or the illusion of it, was sufficient to bypass responsibility. Yet in the quiet, deliberate movements of the herd, in the subtle shifts of my position and the meticulous preparation of the property, they learned the truth. Ownership, respect, and heritage demand recognition, or risk irrevocable lessons. HOA Karen's face had gone pale, the realization settling in like a stone in her chest. She had underestimated the patience required to orchestrate such a precise outcome, the understanding necessary to navigate the intersection of power and history. Her efforts to impose authority without comprehension had failed spectacularly. She had not just trespassed on land. She had trespassed on tradition, on legacy, on respect. And the bulls, quiet yet commanding, had delivered a message no amount of noise could override. As I walked along the fence line, the wind carrying the faint scent of dust and sweat, the lesson became clear. Patience and knowledge can outperform aggression and entitlement every single time. Every fence, every gate, every calculated movement had been more than preparation. It had been strategy, a choreography of consequence that respected life while asserting control. The herd had responded to guidance, instinct, and trust, not brute force, proving that mastery often lies in subtlety rather than confrontation. The neighbors, finally observing the aftermath, began to grasp the lesson without words. They had seen entitlement collide with heritage, and the results were unambiguous. Respect is not assumed. It is earned, cultivated, and protected with patience and precision. Authority misapplied can be dismantled quietly, yet absolutely, when met with knowledge and steadfast preparation. I paused at the edge of the pasture, looking at the bulls grazing calmly once more. They were more than animals. They were symbols, living evidence of care, foresight, and vigilance. Their presence reminded me, and anyone watching, that power cannot be taken lightly. Heritage carries weight. Boundaries exist for a reason. Patience is a weapon sharper than any tool or threat. HOA Karen and the hunters departed that day, carrying with them the weight of humility and recognition. The ranch remained intact, the herd unscathed, the lesson indelibly marked in the minds of those who had witnessed it. And as I stood beneath the fading sun, the hum of the land beneath me, I knew that this moment would linger far longer than anger, noise, or threats ever could. The bulls had spoken, and the message was unmistakable. Entitlement may trespass, but heritage, preparation, and respect command.